And welcome to episode 137 of Quarkus Insights. And I failed because I forgot to click the right button when we started. But yeah, it's good.
It's not easy pushing buttons.
Yeah, it should be easy, right? So anyway, everyone is on vacation, so we thought we would have some fun. Holly is back from vacation just now, and I think Matt, you also just on vacation. I've been back for 2 weeks, and I'm still trying to recover.
Trying to figure out how to push the buttons.
Yes, exactly. So there's not much news going on. We have a 3.3 come next week. I think we'll talk more about it next week. I'll say one thing just because I find it hilarious or good is that Quarkus will be 54% faster to start with because we're changing it from 3.3.0 final to 3.3.0. So the upgrade will be, super fast. It'll be twice as fast as you used to. So that's the good kind of metrics. But anyway, that's the kind of. So on a more serious note, I think Holly, you bumped into Matt at some point, and or was it Aaron? I can't remember. Someone
probably both of us at different times.
And you have this presentation where you compare the different frameworks, and we say, hey, let's get on and talk about the differences because we want to we like to learn and share experiences. And of course, Quark's going to win everything. That's what we say. No.
We have the edit button.
No, we actually said to Matt, please come on and tell us what's good and bad, and we'll take it from there and learn. So anyway, let's just keep it quick. So Matt, maybe you introduce yourself, and we start from there.
Yeah, my name is Matt Raible. I'm a hick from the sticks. I grew up in the backwoods of Montana with no electricity, no running water, and had to walk 2 miles to the bus stop every day. So I had quite the childhood. But these days, I work as a developer advocate for Okta. And last year around this time, I moved from the Okta development team or the Okta dev advocacy team to the Auth0 dev advocacy team. So we're trying to call it Auth0 by Okta, but most people know it as Auth0. But it's basically very similar to Okta service in the sense that we're providing OAuth or OpenID Connect or even SAML if people really want it to users, and they integrate it in their apps as they need to.
Cool. So just Auth0 is the online service, and Okta is I forgot the connection between.
No, they actually at this time last year we had two competing products, right? We bought our biggest competitor like 2.5 years ago. That was Auth0. And what Auth0 does is like customer identity management, they call it. I basically say you as an app developer would embed it in your app or you'd redirect to it, right? It's basically same thing as Keycloak, right? Which all the salespeople in my company will be like, no, don't say that, right? But it's basically to a developer the same thing, right? It's a server that's at a URL and you have endpoints and all that, right? And so Okta had a competing product that was called Okta SIAM, Customer Identity Access Management, right? And so then they had Okta Workforce. And so they had Okta Workforce, which people use as employees in a company, right? And then SIAM, which people would, use for their apps. And so they basically realized from their salespeople that, it's really tough to sell the same product with two different brands, right? And so they basically said, okay, Okta SIAM, we're not deprecating it, but we're going to stop selling it, right? We're going to sell Auth0 first. And then if you're an Okta Workforce company and you want a simple add-on, you can use Okta SIAM or you can use Auth0. So as you can imagine, just me confusing you with this, like,
but this is actually
as well,
I knew Okta was doing Auth0, but I didn't actually realize Okta, anyway, it was mixed up in my brain, so it was good. Now I understand it, and I definitely like Auth0. I understand it's a simple name. It's like authentication and zero. It's simple.
Right.
Okta is like complicated and big, but
right.
Cool. Yeah, we actually in Quarkus, I don't think we don't have a direct support for it, but we do support it because of OIDC and similar way we support Keycloak and that kind of thing. So that's pretty cool. Awesome.
Yeah, I was just now typing to check because I thought we had direct support for it and we don't.
Yeah, I don't. There's not. Well, direct support is by OIDC. Like that's one of the things we did early on. Like Quarkus doesn't have a hard coupling to Keycloak, people think that it has because we work for Red Hat and we have Keycloak and that kind of thing. We use Keycloak for our testing. It's part of the I think the dev service we have is currently default to Keycloak, which is, by the way, changing. We are making a fake key dev service to make it even faster. And I'm not sure whether that's 3.3 or 3.4, but yeah. So anyway, my point is that the actual security infrastructure in Quarkus is not tied to Keycloak. If it's tied to anything, it's OIDC that we kind of put our hat on, saying, hey, as long as we can talk to something OIDC, we're fine. We wanted to. Yeah.
In most of my examples is microprofile JWT authentication. That's what I use for OAuth resource server, right? Just to stand up a backend that actually takes in an access token, right? And so it's interesting because like with Helidon, right, they have microprofile support as well. And so like the configuration for a Quarkus app versus a Helidon app is the same. Like their properties files and the properties are exactly the same. But then they also have their reactive version, which is SE. And it only has OIDC support. It doesn't have JWT or microprofile. So I updated all my examples to try to make a reactive version of each. And I basically hit a wall with Helidon because I was like, well, they have OIDC, but I don't want a client ID and a client secret. I just need an issuer, right? I just need to stand it up and do job validation. And I couldn't find any information on it. So.
Yeah, I don't know. We have both. We have the microphone JWT and OIDC. So yeah. That's cool.
Sounds like we've got a gap for an Auth0 dev service, though.
Well, the problem is Auth0 is not available standalone, as far as I know. Where? Maybe you can tell me I'm wrong.
No. Like, that's one of the reasons we use Keycloak and JHipster is because as a developer, you can generate a new app and then start it up and use it, right? You don't need an internet connection. And, with Auth0 or Okta or, any other service, like you're going to need an internet connection. And that's kind of tends to rub developers the wrong way, right? If they have to sign up for a service. So that's why we just use Keycloak in a Docker container. And I think, I'm having discussions currently at my company where, we use Keycloak in some posts and maybe we switched to Auth0, or we just published one that was, using Keycloak and then adding Auth0 as an upstream provider. And I was off on vacation when we published that and it got pulled back. Right, because they were like, you can't talk about Keycloak on the Auth0 blog, and I'm like, well, actually, like developers really like Keycloak, right? It's not a slight to Auth0 at all, right? And so I'm still working to get that published, but who knows? Maybe it never will be.
Sure. Yeah. No. It's the fun of open source of you can combine and try things out, but yeah, when business stuff gets involved, it becomes tricky. So
right.
Anyway, no, just on the thing. I'm not sure when it's coming, but we've been talking about this. We had Steph who works on the Quarkus team. He's been for a long time. He's been improving. He's done all the all the testing and setup of how to authenticate with Twitter and GitHub and Google and Apple and all the fun stuff. Because one thing is to get the protocol, like the software to talk, but there's all these steps you have to do to set up and sign up and all that kind of thing. But then because he did it so often, he tested this stuff, he got tired of Keycloak because Keycloak, even though it's fast, it's not really fast. It take a few seconds or even it takes longer than you want it to do if you're doing this 10 times per minute or something.
Right.
So Keycloak is still the default, but he wrote a dummy Auth service, a dummy dev service that will have the same behavior as the Keycloak dev service of I forgot, there's 2 users and 2 roles, and you can configure it, but then it just starts instantly. And the only thing it does is if you put these username and password in, you're in and you have those roles, and that's it. And if you don't do that, then they will fail.
So does it allow you to get access tokens and stuff like that as well?
I believe so, but it's the idea is to just simulate an OIDC JWT setup. It's not secure, but it's enough for 90% of your testing of just I don't need. Yeah, that's the idea.
Well, I saw my first demo, I apologize for not digging in sooner, but to the dev services stuff,
Yeah.
at the Denver Jug in July, there was a presenter who did a fabulous job. He had 15 minutes of talking and then 45 minutes of just playing around with Quarkus. And the dev stuff for Keycloak was awesome because it allowed you to get an access token, right? And that's what people struggle with a lot is, okay, I set this app up and I can log in with it, but how do I get an access token to test the endpoints, right? And it's complicated, right? And with the dev service, it was just like copy paste, you're good to go, right?
And just I don't want to it's still Keycloaks is still if you want to test more than just basic stuff, then yeah, you would use a Keycloak dev service, and we still will have a Keycloak dev service to for the full end-to-end testing. But for the hey, I'm just writing a web app kind of thing, you don't need the full and wait for a container to start up, because that's another thing people don't realize. Dev services is that, for example, the H2 database is not a container. The dev service is not a container. So and a dev service does not have to use test containers. It can also just start in process something. And that's the same idea here. Hey, if you need something that fakes it, then this is enough. So yeah. No, good stuff. But anyway, that's probably next week or some weeks from now that we'll have that. But yeah. So Matt, I don't on Sergey. Oh, Sergey's on the line here. He says we support dev service authentication to Auth 0. Yeah. So it may be cool. I didn't know. So
me neither.
Yeah. Cool.
I look forward to the demo.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd like to be a guest author on the Auth 0 blog and show us how to do that.
Yeah, that'll be good. So yeah, Sergey, you just you got a fan on that one. Cool. Anyway, Matt, do you have somewhere you want to start? You talk about you showing something or?
Well, yeah, I can show you the numbers that I recently gathered. Let's see here, startup time comparison. So if you're showing my screen there.
I am.
Yep.
You just make it full screen and zoom in for the old eyes.
Yep. Let's see if we can bump the fonts. I have to actually, well, we can pull it out of here and then we can bump the font. So we'll do it in that one bigger. Nope. Open it in Chrome and then bump the fonts like that. Is that better?
That's awesome.
All right. We'll make this bigger, and then I created an app basically with each framework, and the whole idea is just standing up a simple OAuth 2 resource server. And so with microprofile, that can mean JWT authentication. It's basically the API will return a 401 if you try to access it, and if you pass in a valid access token, then it'll work, and then it just sends back the user's name. So not much information, but you can see here's, Quarkus or Micronaut, just installing Micronaut, creating an app, and then adding a hello controller. If we look at Quarkus, it's very similar, using SDK man, just installing the latest version and adding small RIDE, JWT, and REST easy. And this is a bit different the way I'm doing things now from when I first started. When I first started, basically I got feedback from the Quarkus folks that were like, use REST easy reactive instead of just REST easy. Because it'll work with both, whether you're doing, blocking or non-blocking with reactive. But what I noticed was no one else or no other frameworks that I was using really had reactive in there. So I've only recently backed off. This isn't in a blog post. This is just when I do this presentation where I'm using REST easy, because I feel that, if I'm comparing Quarkus to Spring Boot, for instance, and I use REST easy reactive, I should probably use Webflux in Spring Boot, right? So I'm working on that. I actually submitted a talk to Devox that didn't get in, but it is a backup talk that's like reactive REST APIs for the win, ? Right? Yeah. Because my question is is reactive faster for these simple tests where I'm just testing startup time and memory usage, right? And so I'm trying to answer that question for myself. I don't know, but that's why I'm not using the REST easy reactive here. Okay. And then if I look at the other ones, there's Spring Boot using SDK man as well, and then Helidon down here, which they have a CLI that I use. But then the more interesting part is the startup time comparison. So what I did is I actually compiled all these with the latest Graal VM. I ran each image 3 times before recording the numbers, and then I ran each, image 5 times, and then wrote them up divided by 5. And so you can see here's the latest numbers, right? And as I was telling these folks before we started this podcast, they change every time, right? So if I was to run them today with, this streaming setup going on, they would probably be 5 seconds slower each, right? Just because of like what's going on with my laptop. And so performance numbers on a laptop, they're never great way to, really tell the real world kind of performance, but I think they do give some sort of indication. And the crazy thing is I started doing this probably 2 years ago, and these numbers have fluctuated wildly that time. I mean, at one point, Quarkus was 18 seconds or Quarkus was actually like 17 seconds, right? And Micronaut was 18. So they've been neck and neck, and even, this 25.8 is still like.
We talking milliseconds, right? Not seconds.
I was just about to say.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's why I got my table here to have a good, milliseconds to start here. So one of the things I like to do is actually demo this.
Serious problem with your laptop.
Yeah.
Right. So I do have. Let's not use the reactive branch. Let's check out main here, and then.
So just before we go into detail, you said 2 things here. I think it's important for us to. I'll not object, but just educate on is.
Okay.
The REST-EC reactive. So first the performance stuff, like measuring things. Yes, if you want to do real things, do it like your real app, but also do it on production-like hardware, because I tell you the difference between a 32-core MacBook ARM piece of hardware and a constrained Docker container in some restrained cloud is going to be massively different. And so you could have something that runs faster on your laptop, but then slower in the cloud, and vice versa for that matter, right? And this comes to the point of the REST-EC versus REST-EC reactive. I would say you should always use REST-EC reactive because the end user experience is the same. You can use blocking or not, right? What REST-EC reactive does is that the backend, the core of Quarkus, is always reactive. We use Vertex at the bottom. So even if you don't, there's still some reactive stuff going on for the network connection stuff. But when you use REST-EC reactive, we are able to utilize that even more, so to speak, in simple terms. I know Georgios and Clem is going to come after me and say there's more to it, but basically using REST-EC reactive, you'll use the modern stack, the modern implementation, and it'll be the one that will be able to squeeze out the more, CPU and memory. Not squeeze out more, but use more efficiently. And therefore, you should. If you want to use WebFlux on Spring, yes, you should compare it to use Mutiny and Vertex on Quarkus. But you should still use the REST-EC reactive extension if you use the blocking API, because it's the same API the user has, whether you're on Spring or Micronaut. It's blocking, and by using REST-EC reactive, you actually get the stuff that will be fast. So if the numbers you're showing here is actually with REST-EC, what we call classic, I'm happy because then I know we will be faster if you just upgrade to that one. But you're probably going to tell me in 5 minutes I updated and wasn't faster, but that's another thing. But, yeah.
Well, I mean, we could test it here. You know how GraalVM builds are, right? It might take 5 minutes for me to recompile it. And
yeah, no. Any result you show here will be, affected by your streaming stuff. But
right. Well, let's try it. Let's see what Quarkus starts in here.
Yeah, I sometimes think the REST-EC reactive name isn't the best one, and we should have called it like REST-EC modern or something, because it does, it makes sense that you would think that you're using, or that you have to use reactive when you use it just because of the name, but it isn't. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why you might not want to use reactive, and those just don't apply to the REST-EC reactive extension, because most of the reasons not to use reactive are the programming model hurts my head and that kind of thing.
Why does REST-EC Classic even exist then?
Well, one is that we need a REST-EC implementation that can run on the Java EAP server, Wildfly and EAP, and that's using REST-EC Classic. So that's fine. But also just the fact of, hey, like we could also spend time convincing everyone to move to a new modern implementation of REST EC, but then you'll have differences. So what we agreed between the REST EC, let's say classic, actually was that we needed something that could be reactive all the way through, like from the core up till the end user. And REST EC classic just can't be that way because it's just not done in a way that works. So we started this off, and initially this was actually hidden inside Quarkus. It was a separate, like it was internal implementation detail, but we pulled it out so that it could be shared. And the goal is that over time, the REST EC will reactive will be the default, anywhere where we can do it. The reason why there are still some left, and I forgot what they are, but there are still some spec things that REST EC reactive doesn't do, either because it is just very hard to do in a reactive fashion, or two, it's just something that we never got any requests for, so therefore we didn't do them. So it's just to try and like avoid what's called the inventor's dilemma, like where you get stuck on the old one. So we said, hey, let's have this, and we call it REST reactive because it enables reactive. But yeah, so it exists to make sure that we can move forward, basically, without telling everyone else to stop.
So your recommendation would be, if I'm going to create a, non-reactive version of Quarkus versus a reactive version of Quarkus, they would actually use the same dependencies, and then
Yes.
maybe my code would be a little different for the reactive version.
It's for your use case, they should be exactly the same. There is a few small differences, but they will be if you use Quarkus, actually when you use Quarkus to create an app, it should actually use REST reactive by default in your POM file. Like if you create
right, without any extensions, it'll do that, right?
Yes.
You're right. But I'm always adding that JWT extension, so that's why I have to specify the reactive or the REST easy extension.
Yeah, but does it actually pick the REST easy or the REST easy reactive one?
No, it picks REST easy with the command that I used up here.
Yeah. So, but no, you definitely, like, you should use REST reactive by default, whether you're using reactive programming or not.
Okay, that makes sense because, well, when comparing it with Micronaut, because I have a section, it's not here now, but on reactive that I've added in a branch, and in there, for Micronaut, you don't have to do anything that I could tell, right? But for Quarkus, if you used REST easy, you should use REST easy reactive. So those two are always the two top ones with the fastest speeds, right? So I think it does make sense in that sense that I should use REST easy reactive. But for Spring Boot, I would use, Webflux. For Helidon, they have a completely different SE framework for reactive. So I'll take that into advice. And before my presentation on Thursday at the Chicago Jug, I'll make sure and update it.
And I can just see Sergey tells me something I forgot. That is similar. I think you add the small right JWT, and small right JWT is not reactive, but Quarkus OIDC has a reactive mode. So it would actually, I'm not sure in your example it's going to show up, but that would enable you to be more, utilize even more the CPU.
You're saying I have this section here, right, in this pull request that says for Quarkus, convert the Quarkus application to reactive, change the REST easy dependency. So you're saying once I've updated this to use REST easy reactive by default, this guide here should change to using like the small right JWT reactive, or no, the OIDC thing instead of small right JWT.
That's what Sergey says.
Yeah.
Okay.
There might be some details, but he'll tell us. But yeah.
Right, and so my goal with doing this, reactive section here is I eventually want to write a blog post that's like, okay, we've seen the classic version of these frameworks. Now let's look at the reactive one, and is it really faster for startup time and memory usage, right? Because we do hear a lot of hype about reactive and how it's supposed to be faster, right? But according to the Spring Boot folks, like it's only faster for Webflux once you get over 500 requests per second, right? And so I'm not doing anything like that in this comparison, right? So just for the simple comparisons, maybe there's no difference at all.
Yeah, no, and just be fair, like reactive is gonna shine when you put pressure on the system, like concurrent access because they can share the resource better. But I would expect that you will see some startup improvements too, just for the fact that in the, for example, REST Easy Reactive, we are doing stuff more optimized than we are in REST Easy Classic, because REST Easy Classic has to, be backwards compatible in some case where we don't have to for REST Easy Reactive.
Right.
So there should be some small gains.
Well, and another interesting thing that happened when I first started this was, I think it was Helidon and Spring Boot. They were doing like the issuer fetching and the JWKS fetching of keys on startup. And so I was able to convince them just from this comparison that, wait till the first request, because that's how Micronaut and Quarkus are doing it. And they're going to beat you every time if you keep doing it that way. And if you want to be serverless, you should be a fast startup, And so that was an interesting result when I first started doing this.
Yeah. Well, which one is it? Oh, to get the key, or?
Yeah, the JWKS key. Basically, what would happen is, like with Spring Security, if I didn't have an internet connection, it would fail to start the app because it was trying to fetch that metadata for the JWKS stuff on startup.
Sure. We're trying to be fair everywhere we can on Quarkus. Like we do measure like after first request, like I said, when things have been initialized. That's what we report at least. But yeah, sometimes you bump into this like, well, you rather want it to start up than fail early in this case. So yeah.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So what's the numbers? Well,
you can see here, right? We have 30 milliseconds. So that's probably because we're streaming, right? Because the tests I did last Friday were 25.8.
Yeah.
And so I'll update this to use the reactive one and then update these numbers. So I'll publish this presentation on Thursday after I speak at the Chicago Jug, and then you'll see like the latest results that way.
Cool.
I'd love to see the comparison between the reactive and the non-reactive dependency as well, just to sort of, because we're telling you it's going to be faster.
Right.
Yeah, be interesting to have that confirmed.
Yep. So I'll add that in there. But again, the whole reactive stuff was, first of all, for a DevOps talk, which I should probably like do anyway, because it is a backup talk, and you know how backup talks work. Like they're going to ask me to do it 2 hours before, right? So I should probably work on that. And I did want to do a blog post. So a lot of times, for my developer advocacy, I write the example app, I write the blog post, extract the presentation, all that kind of stuff. So
cool.
Yeah, but one of the things I did want to mention was, when I first started this, like Spring Boot only had like a native thing that you had to add to it, right, to actually make it work with Graal VM. And since then, Spring Boot 3 has come out last November, and they were supposed to rewrite everything in Spring so it didn't use reflection and it worked with Graal VM a lot better. And it does, but like the results are not what I expected, right? I expected it to be like neck and neck with Micronaut and Quarkus, and you can see here, it's not, right? Yep. It's almost twice as slow. And so they made progress, but they didn't have the impact that I thought they would.
Yeah. No, and it's, I very much appreciate that Spring Boot actually, became native and showed that, hey, there is some value in doing it, and it's part of the Spring Boot framework. But one of the reasons why we did Quarkus and not just made like Wildfly and others Spring Native, made them Graal VM, was just that we realized to actually get a real like my brain, like impact, like a noticeable stuff that will actually keep getting faster, is that we have to do this thing like build time compilations and optimizations, and just like the way we initialize things just has to be done differently. And Spring Boot is getting there, but they just have so much stuff that it will take them time because they have that existing ecosystem to fit into. And if you go to Spring Boot, I believe, and I believe they do state that it's only a subset of Spring Boot that they supported the native in, not everything. Whereas with Quarkus, and I think Micronaut to a certain extent, the ecosystem is way broader. Because we've worked with them, from day one, like 4 years ago, to ensure that's there.
And to be fair to all of them, we have, JHipster blueprints for each one of them. And a blueprint is, overriding the default like behavior in a JHipster app. And so for Quarkus and in Micronaut, we do have blueprints that overrides like Spring Boot. And we have not had success in getting native to work for any of them. Like straight up, right? With a brand new JHipster app. But that's a lot of it's because there's so many new things into that ecosystem that weren't considered by the frameworks, right? Because we're doing Angular, we're doing Reactive, we're doing Open API and stuff like that. So it gets even more complicated when you get into like a real world app with all the different things you might add.
Well, I thought we had the Quarkus hipster working in native. For maybe that was just still working properly.
No, you're right. The latest version I do believe works, but it's Quarkus 2, right? So I haven't pushed it that much because Quarkus 3 is out, right? And you never want to be like, hey, look, we released a new version for a framework from a year ago.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, hopefully that should be easy to do, but cool.
Yeah, I do think it works with 2, and there's a pull request out there that I started for upgrading that blueprint to Quarkus 3, so hopefully we'll be able to get that made happen as people get back from vacation here in the fall.
Awesome. Cool.
And so the other major comparison I do is memory usage, right? And so this is testing the memory in megabytes of each app, first of all, after it starts, and then after 1 request, and after 5 requests. So this needs a after 1 request in there. I need to update that title, but you can see here that 46 megs for Micronaut, 37. So Quarkus is the least memory usage, and then after 5 requests, it's the least memory usage as well. And the interesting thing about this one was both Micronaut and Helidon, when I first added this test, increased the memory on every request. Nice. And I was like, what? Like, are they not testing this stuff? Like, and you can see Helidon is still doing that, right? Like, here's after 1 request, it adds 20 megs. After 5, it keeps growing. And if I added a couple more, it'd keep growing. So I have convinced them to open tickets on it, but it's also, to me, like, can't believe they're not testing this.
I'll defend them a bit. Of course, like Quarkus is the best. That's good. But it could be, if it's 5 requests, it could be that the default setting for whatever they do for queues and pooling, that you literally are hitting, as a 5 request, you hit it, so they might expand by more than Quarkus does. I don't know. Like that,
right.
So, but again, it could also be, if you had done this at 500 requests or 5,000, and you've seen the same trend, then yes, for sure that'll be problematic. 5 requests, I know. I'll it's called channel my inner Francesco, saying that's not enough to get to. That's statistically insignificant. So yeah, you should do more. Are you just doing manual requests, or are you using like?
Yeah, just HTTPIE in my in my terminal.
Yeah, so you should. Yeah, we should. Francesco, I forgot what. That's like Hyperfoil or Worker, where you can basically it can run like 1,000 requests for you, and it will just show you the numbers. And I think that will be the first thing that he will tell you should do, because then you at least, you get it to be a bit more.
Well, so with Micronaut, what I found is when I first, told them about it or communicated with them, they had this Netty default allocator that once I added that, it stopped it from growing, right? And so you'll see here, this is from the Helidon folks, Daniel here, last name Keck. He basically, said they've logged these 2 issues, possible native memory leak here, right? So I mentioned that it might be a similar property, right? And I think that matches what you're saying, where, it might be by default, like, give me all the load, right? But then you need to.
This one could actually be a bit more tricky, which, again, I'm not the expert on this one, but I remember this stuff is. Well, I'll channel my inner Clemon in this case. He told me multiple times that if you just use Netty by default, it will have leak issues on native. And that's one thing that I know that we do very much of in Quarkus is test native first. Well, we test JavaM, of course, but native, we know that it will have a slightly different behavior. And for Netty and that stuff, we've spent so much time to ensure that we have a setup, a config, and a way we allocate resources that works in both. And that's probably what you're seeing here, that we've done that work already, like the last couple
Right.
of weeks. So, yeah.
So I can show you how I'm testing memory just because that might be good. So, Quarkus is up and running here. If we do HTTP 8080, hello, it'll be a 401, right? And then if I create an access token with Auth0, because that's what it's configured to use, you can send that access token and then it'll succeed. So it's running right now, right? And we made that one request, but it didn't process it. So I don't think that really affects the memory. So if we were to copy this access token, and clear, and then set it as a variable, and then use HTTP. So first of all, it started, but we haven't done anything, right? So the memory is 41 megs, right? And then we hit it with an access token.
What's the thing which memory are you measuring here?
So let me show you. I have it in the thing here. It's just using this PS command.
Okay, so it's RSS. Yeah, that's the important one. Yes, got it.
Yep. So now if we test it, right, it's 10 megabytes more, but then we test it a few more times. And then it grows, a little bit, but not much, right? Just a couple megs. So that's my rudimentary test that I'm doing.
Sure. Yeah, I'll pay this. We actually have an article where we explain how to make how to measure things more correctly, and I think I already shared this with you like some years ago. So you probably already do it, but yeah, it's important to know about memory. Like resident set size is the important part, and also that you can't just go into Docker and do the same command because it's not gonna report truly. But this article actually explains if you want to compare, then please do. Because and we did this because we had another one doing an article about like comparing these, and what he did was he ran Quarkus in a Docker container and Spring Boot or Micronaut like on his machine and compared the memory sizes, and we were just like, no, like, you have to, you're doing it wrong. So yeah, just be careful on that one. But yeah, but
Right.
you get it. You're messing the at least the right indicator. So that's cool.
So yeah, that's most of what I had for a demo. I don't know if you want to stop sharing my screen so we don't get the tunnel thing going.
Cool. Yeah, and if anyone on is listening in, if you have any questions, just throw away and we'll throw them on Matt. But so now you could talk about memory and performance. Memory and CPU. What other things do you use normally from comparing? And is there stuff that we should learn from on Quarkus?
Well, as you can see, it's very like, me not using many of the features, right? And so I think, when I talk about this stuff, like people are like, yeah, but you're forgetting like dev services, you're forgetting, all the other cool features that a framework might have. And so I fully admit that, right? And
Sure.
And I think, we can all do a better job of educating ourselves on these various frameworks by just attending your local Java user group or, attending something like this, because I attended a Denver Java user group in July, and the guy did a talk on Quarkus, and he spent 45 minutes of that time just doing live demos of all the dev services and all the cool features, right? And for me, like, I hadn't seen that before. I don't know if I, missed it, or maybe, most of the Quarkus talks just assume people know that or something. And, I was blown away. I was like, wow, I'd never heard of you as a speaker before, but that was one of the best talks I've ever seen, right? And so I really praised him a lot, because I think, a lot of these frameworks do have cool features, but we don't see them because we don't spend the time to dig in, because we just want to get a job done, right?
Yeah. No,
there's kind of two things. Like, part of it is sort of figuring out what's important to you, because like a lot of the talk about Quarkus focuses on performance, and then some people say, oh, but I don't care about performance. And then it's like, yeah, that's fair enough. For some things you really don't care whether your startup time is 17 milliseconds or 40 milliseconds. So then what is important to you? But then the other thing is sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. So something like dev services would actually make your job way easier and better, but you don't even know that it's there to look it up to realize that that's the thing that you need. Sorry, Max.
Yeah. No, and it's funny because when I joined the Quarkus team, when it's been around for a few months at the time, it had been announced. I came 5 months in. everyone was like, okay, Quarkus is about native image. That's what it does. And I was like, yeah, it does, but it's the freaking dev mode that is that was the kicker for me, because I've been doing developer tools for years, and I've been trying to get people to use my Eclipse plugin or my IntelliJ plugin, and I realized that, yeah, we had maybe, like, if we had a 10,000 or we had about 100,000 users a day on some of these plugins, but there's way more people using Wildfly and EP, and they had no idea the tool could do that because it requires steps to do. Dev mode,
Right.
it's just there. You don't have to do anything. And then we added continuous testing, we added dev services, and we added the dev UI and all these other stuff. And then on top of that, we had the APIs, which are nicer and simpler and the whole thing. And I remember I came back and I just told people, just stop talking about performance. It's like, people got it. Like, focus about performance, fine. So when I do my talks, it's mainly, yep, be fast, it's great, but just see how much I can restart here. Sorry, how much I can do. And I always, the great thing is I try and practice, but always something goes wrong, like the network doesn't work or something else. But I'm basically restarting Quarkus like 10 times before someone blinked and realized what I've been doing. And I end up spending most of my time explaining, hey, you didn't notice that I actually failed 10 times, but I still got all my stuff done. And that seemed to connect to a whole different group of people. They're like sitting there with their like Java E app or Spring Boot app, waiting like 30, 40 seconds for whatever startup thing we have. And that blows people's mind. And yeah, we hear it. I always have to remind people that, yeah, we're 4 years into this, and most people still haven't tried neither of these frameworks, right? Yeah, it's good to remind people about the stuff we can do. Yeah. So I like the fact that you guys are doing this talk just to show the performance stuff. We can focus on the developer tools, developer produced.
You're just I'm a subcontractor for you, but for free.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's a good point that you mentioned, especially about the instant reload, right? So if you modify any Java files or properties files or anything in a Quarkus app, it instantly reloads, right? And no one else has that, right? They have it where if you compile, it'll reload, right? But actually detecting changes on the file system without a compile is awesome. You know, anyone like James Ward talks about it all the time, right? It's the best like developer love you can feel, right? Where you just do something and it works, and you're like, wow. That was so cool.
Yeah, and that's actually it's the biggest mistake is, not mistake. We made it fast from the beginning, so you don't actually notice when we make improvements. But yeah, it's funny, like it's just that people assume stuff. They've been used to this, and then they just assume Quarkus work the same way. You're like, no, like it actually makes it better. Same in dev service. They think, Quarkus is great, a native image, and to develop with Quarkus, you have to have Docker installed because dev services requires Docker. Well, dev service does not, all of them doesn't require Docker. Some of them do, most, but that's the thing. But you can still use Quarkus as you've been using your Java E and Spring Boot testing forever, and manually start up a database or container and connect to it, and it's all good. And people just forget, I want the best of the best. Yeah, but if your org doesn't allow it, then we can't fix that. But we will still work in your existing environments. So yeah, it's fun to educate people about new features. So
yeah.
The other thing we should talk about actually is back on performance, and again, like figuring out what you actually care about, because it might be the startup time, but it might be throughput. And I think people sometimes assume that because Quarkus has a fast startup time, it has a slow throughput, and it's actually the opposite. When we measure it, we're consistently the best on throughput as well as on the startup time and on the memory. Like, it's sort of the win-win-win. And I think people sometimes forget that. And I think it's not something that, for example, you're measuring for any of the frameworks in your use case.
So so Matt, I'm not sure if because this is actually one that we've seen again and again, that people they do a test and they go like, hey, Spring Boot or Micronaut is faster than Quarkus, and you bad. And then we go look at their example, And I think unless we have a bug in what they're testing, what we tend to find is that they run tests, but they what they test is the framework and a database. And we realize that the framework, the process that runs the framework is actually not doing anything. It's mainly just testing the database and how fast it can do its thing.
Right.
And because Quarkus or Spring Boot or Micronaut will do something like different, you can see difference in the actual database performance depending on how this works. And then on top of that, they tend to use measuring tools that doesn't detect what's it called? I forgot the name. I've seen this is the vacation. I erased this from memory, but they don't actually detect latency on the client side. So you will see Spring Boot like go way faster than Quarkus, but that's because they just measured the wrong thing. And what you then do, what we told them to do, well, first use the right tool to measure with, like Hyperfoil instead of WRK or what's the other one called? The Apache one that's very much used.
AB or something.
I forgot, but they tend to have the same measuring mistake. So if you fix the way you measure, and then you run, and then you squeeze the resources on the process that has the framework, in general, you'll see Quarkus will continue to run for a much longer time than any of the other frameworks. And that's the big difference that generally people show up and say, hey, we measured and Quarkus is slower. And we say, well, try and squeeze the actual CPU, which is what's going to happen in new cloud.
Right.
Yeah, Quarkus can do the same throughput or more with less resources, which is important in these days where people are squeezed on their actual IT budget.
Right, and especially if you're doing native images. But what we've seen in the JHipster project is, and I don't know if this is reflective of the Java community in general, but not that many people are interested in native, right? In the general Java community, right? They're like, well, the JVM, like we've been told for 10 or 20 years that the JVM is the way to go and it'll optimize over time and stuff like that. So this native thing, all it helps me with is startup time, right? And I don't have that problem because my app's running for months at a time, right? Not seconds at a time.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing is that with Quarkus, we feel like we can do both. Like we can be very fast to start up and use little memory, but we can also run for a long time and stay at a low rate. The GraalVM guys are claiming that the recent version of GraalVM, but the GraalVM Enterprise, they want to claim that they can actually compete with the throughput of a JVM or OpenDK. And the early measurements seems to indicate that it's true, but it depends on your application. But what that gives you is ability to start out really fast. So I mean, like updates can be very fast, even though you run long time, which could be right. So yeah.
I like that it's in the enterprise version though, right? They're like, well, here's the hook that'll make you want a license.
And thank you, Holly. I think you posted like it's coordinate emission. That was the word I was looking for. That's the thing that the different tools miss. Yeah. So yeah, I saw Jonathan had a question here. He says it's DevServer super nice. Were you guys inspired by Angular Serve or other Node stuff for library load? Yes and no. As we've been working on library load forever, like even before we had Quarkus, we wanted library load to be there, but we just hit issues in Java. But I would say that we didn't go and like steal, but we were like annoyed that when people compared Java with Node.js and others, they're like, hey, they just work over here. And so what we aim for was in Quarkus that this is available out of the box and you don't have to do any of those things. But the approach we do is fairly unique. It's using JVM and all the tricks we can pull out. And he says effective test I executed. I'm not sure he's asking. Oh, where is it? There. Up.
I think he's talking
if you run
the developer experience.
Yeah, so when you run the continuous testing, if you change a test or change some code, we do keep track of if that code is referenced from a test, and if it is, then we run that first, or we do that. So we've tried to make it pretty smooth. Yeah. So yeah, cool. Well, no one's asking questions. They're boring. Please, you have 5 minutes left. You have a question.
Yeah, I thought this one was going to be super controversial. I thought, yeah.
Hey, Matt, do you have anything controversial to say so we can trigger people? Or I have a controversial question?
Yeah, I do. If you want to share my screen, I got something controversial.
Sure.
Let's see here. It's up. So when you create a new Quarkus app and configure it, you have to specify an issuer and a public key location, right? So I don't think this is really Quarkus in general. I think it's MicroProfile in general, but let's look up this well-known JWKS. So I have a tenant here. I think it's have something. There we go. So if you have an issuer, right, in OAuth or OpenID Connect terms, if you go to that issuer and you go to .wellknown/OpenID configuration, the JWKS URI is there, right? And so if you're looking at this code here, like with Spring Boot, all you need is to specify the issuer, and it goes and looks up the JWKS URL. And so this is like a MicroProfile thing for me, where for the longest time I was like, it seems so weird that you have to specify, the same thing twice. And then I realized, you can do it with property, so it's not as much, repeating yourself. But to me, it's an oversight with basically MicroProfile JWT because you're repeating yourself and you don't have to, right? But I also realize it could be a performance thing, right? Where the reason they're doing it is because it's looking it up without having to look it up twice, in a sense.
Yeah, this is a Sergey question. I'm not sure if he's on. Yeah, I was just about. Yeah, okay. So he's saying this. Yes. So Quarkus. So what you're using small JWT, I think, is like I said the MicroProfile implementation.
Right.
If you use Quarkus OIDC, we do these kind of optimization or improvements. Let's call that. I think that one will skip some of those parts, and you have to configure less for it.
Okay.
So that'll be the case for it. Yeah,
that's my
he's saying that Microsoft JWT is not aware of OIDC, but Quarkus OIDC is, and therefore you don't have to. And I guess it's the same thing for the Spring setup, maybe, that it assumes it's OIDC, and therefore you can do it.
Yeah, well, with Spring Boot, I'm using the OAuth 2 resource server dependency, but then I can specify an issuer, right? And it'll do all the JWKS lookup for me.
Yeah. So for this one, use Quarkus OIDC. It will know the right thing. JWT is one level below that.
Okay.
To do it. Well, that was easy.
That's all. You could stop sharing my screen if you want, so we don't get the Zoom effect.
But this is a good example of how to say the people asking, okay, what's in Quark? Okay, you're fast, you have a good developer experience. What else is there? And that is these polish and the APIs. And that's why, like, we generally recommend, yes, you can use the, like, say, the raw low-level things. It will work fine in most cases. But yeah, try and explore the Quarkus OIDC, the Quarkus Renar, Quarkus other things, because there we've added some of these, API end user, magic, so to speak.
And I do need to revisit the OIDC stuff because I was able to get it working with Okta, but not Auth0, right? And that was, I think, actually an Auth0 problem, not like a Quarkus problem, because, for instance, they didn't have an end session endpoint, and it would fail in startup because it couldn't find that endpoint. And now we're adding that. Like, we've added it. If you request it, you can get it, but it's going to be GA by the end of the year or whatever. So that is on my list, and I'm actually working on labs for our what we call our developer center to add labs for Spring Boot, Quarkus, and Micronaut, because basically Auth0 until like me and Deepu joined was mostly like a JavaScript company, right? When they would market to developers, they would market to the JavaScript community, and Deepu and I basically came in and said, you know, there's this Java community out there that's huge. And by the way, like, you know, OIDC just works with a lot of their frameworks. They don't need like an add-on to make it work. So let's start talking about that. So we're making a big effort to get some labs into our dev center where people can, you know, spend 5 or 10 minutes and make something work.
So what I learned is we should not make our dev service work without Keycloak. Just keep Keycloak, because then you'll advertise for it every time. That sounds good.
And that's part of my job is to try to get fired every week, right? So it keeps things exciting.
Well, it's just Monday, and you say Keycloak multiple times in this first hour, so that's good. That's awesome. No. Cool. Well, we haven't told an hour. There was a few questions. That was good. And Sergey, thank you for the update. And he just added one more. It says, yeah, the ODC just specified issue. We can dive into the details later. Yeah. So he's up for, you know, questions. And as always, like if you have issues, just, you know, reach out. We'll help with the comparison. And
yeah, I've had great success with just talking to people on the team and getting help. So thank you all for that.
Awesome. Well, good. Well, thank you, Matt, for joining in, and Holly, welcome back from vacation. And yeah, we'll see you all next time or next week then.
All right.
Cool.
Cheers.
Cool. You're on.